everyone, I'm Sarah Levon. Today we're going to talk all about what happens when your water breaks. So what does that mean in the body? What should you do when you're at home? What do you pay attention to? And then what might that look like in the hospital setting? Let's get started. I am delighted to be here. Today is all about your water bag breaking. I'd spoken in my when to go to the hospital video about your water breaking and that being one of the indications that you need to go to the hospital. So I want to talk about that a little bit more in depth today, give you a little bit more background, and then really get into the nitty-gritty of what it would look like when that actually happens at home or maybe in the hospital and what that means. So I have my fun little props here. There is my child, my baby, inside of here. So first of all, what is the water bag? So the water bag, to me, if you imagine a big water balloon, is basically inside the uterus, there's a water balloon filling it up, which we're gonna pretend is this. So imagine that the uterine wall, or the muscle that causes contractions, is surrounding this unit, okay? Placenta is this guy. Inside, obviously, is baby. There's a cord floating around in there, and then these are what we call the membranes, and there's actually two layers to it. The water bag, while pregnant, allows for space for the baby to grow. It also, and you can't really see this, can you see the cord in here? The cord is floating around in that water. You want water in there because it allows for space around the cord for it to free float, for it to float freely in there. Otherwise, if there was no water and it was just like empty in there, it would smush the cord and potentially interrupt the blood flow to the baby, which blood equals life and oxygen and other good things. When the water bag breaks, it can break in two locations, which really, like, it can break anywhere, but you think of like two areas that it can break. One is gonna be your typical, obvious, like, she's soaking wet, peed her pants, it's all over the floor, breaking of the water bag. So we're back to my cervix. Here's my cervix. Imagine the cervix is right here. As it starts to open, if the water bag were to break down here and there's a little pocket of water sitting there, you imagine like the empty space is water. When this breaks, or there's a hole in the bag, then all of a sudden, one, you have this little gush of fluid, right? That, like, it's gonna be a little bit more fluid from the bottom. The amount of water that actually comes out and wets you is usually about 1/4 of a cup. Who measured that? I have no idea. But I think about it like, let's say I have 1/4 of a cup in the kitchen full of water and then I drop it on the floor. All of a sudden the floor is gonna look super duper wet. Like, it's gonna be such a pain to clean up. But really, if you were to pull all that water together and put it in that cup again, it's really not actually that much water. The other thing is that prior to that, there's water between the head and the cervix. Once the water bag breaks, then the head can sit on the cervix, put more pressure on the cervix, and help it to dilate. So typically when people's water breaks, they're going to dilate a little bit faster. It's one way that can help speed up labor. So it can break at the bottom, or it could do something that we call a high leak. What does that mean? It just means that the water bag maybe broke up here somewhere up top. So then instead of that gush at the bottom, you have like this little trickle guy that, like, all of a sudden you're like, ooh, I'm wet. Oh my God, I just peed myself. But all of a sudden, maybe you think you peed yourself, you go to the bathroom, you empty your bladder, and then you come back and then you're like, oh my God, I just soaked my panties again. Who says panties? I soaked my underwear again. The other tip I have for you, if you maybe think your water broke, it might be that high leak type thing, but you're not really sure, is to go to the bathroom, empty your bladder, because it is normal that you pee yourself a little bit more frequently towards the end of your pregnancy, and then put a pad on or a panty liner or something, and then walk around for an hour. If after that hour your pad is wet again and you smell it and you're like, it smells like nothing, it's definitely not pee, then it very likely is your water. Once your water breaks, you can expect there to continue to be fluid that comes out of you. What should the fluid look like? The water should be clear. It might be a tiny bit tan tinged, but it really should be clear like water. It shouldn't have a smell. It's very thin like water, hence the name. When your water breaks, I want you to pay attention to 4 things. And these 4 things they're gonna usually ask you about when you get to the hospital. So the first one is, what time did it break? So when you're like, ooh, I feel like it water broke, or you're not really sure, maybe you are sure and you're like, that was definitely my water. I am completely drenched now. Then you look at the clock and you say, okay, it's 7 o'clock, which it's actually 7 o'clock here. The next thing is the amount. Was it a lot or was it a little? What was the color of it? And then was there a smell to it? Does it smell bad? Does it smell like pee? Does it smell like just gross, or does it smell like nothing? It should smell like nothing. The variations in color could be clear. It could also be yellowish. It could be brown. It could be like a thick, kind of with these like little chunks in it. That's not ideal. The ideal color is clear, but we do want to know exactly what color it was. If the color is not clear, what that usually means is that the baby pooped inside. So how do you remember those criteria? The word taco. Taco for time, amount, color, and then odor. So those are the 4 things you pay attention to when your water breaks. I am just blowing up. One of the big concerns and questions that I get in childbirth classes or one-on-one with clients or in the hospital setting is that once a water bag breaks, then does that mean that there's no more water for the baby? Which I already talked about. That water is super important to protect the cord, allow for the baby to grow and move. My answer to that question is yes, there is still water inside. So if we go back to our baby here, imagine that, so all of the water is true. This is not making sense. There. All of this empty space right here, all of this empty space right here is all where the water would be filling in. When the water bag breaks, let's just say it happened at the bottom and the head is sitting right here. The head is going to keep the cervix plugged to allow that water to still be trapped inside and there still be water there. Now, what that looks like for you is that initially there's that gush, and then maybe every time there's a contraction or you walk around or the baby moves, that some of that water can slip out. There's a lot of extra water that's still trapped inside, and then every time you have that leak, it's usually not a lot of water. Eventually, if your water's been broken for a long amount of time, you may start running out of water in there, and so that's where we would typically be able to see that from the fetal monitors that are on your belly that tell us the baby's heartbeat. And then there is a way that we would potentially be able to replace the water inside to allow you to keep laboring. That's like a whole nother long thing. What do you do when your water breaks? First and foremost, it is not an emergency. As long as that water is clear and it's just water coming out of your vagina, then note that criteria and then start packing up your bag. You may be able to even like take a quick shower, pull your stuff together. You don't have to run red lights and stoplights and avoid and sway through traffic trying to get to the hospital in time. It is not like the movies. You usually are going to have a lot of time. Your water can break at any point in your labor and birth. For about 10% of women, it breaks before contractions. So that would mean that I'm just sitting here and all of a sudden I'm like, ooh, my gosh, I'm soaked. I think my water broke. If your water breaks before contractions, that may be something that you want to talk with your doctor about. Some doctors are going to feel super comfortable with you staying home for a certain amount of time, maybe even until your contractions start. For other doctors, they're going to say, nope, once your water breaks, I want you to go into the hospital. So talk to your doctor about which they would prefer. What I would suggest is that if you don't have contractions, you know that the majority of women within the next few hours are going to start contracting. The other thing that you can do is call your doctor and say, hey, look, I think my water broke. I'm not feeling contractions. Is there anything that I can do? And or can I stay home for a little bit of time? And a lot of times your doctor may have that conversation with you and say, yeah, okay, you know, if the contractions get really strong and you're super uncomfortable, then come on in. If they don't start, I do want you to come into the hospital, typically around the 6-hour mark, maybe more. Every doctor is gonna have a different preference for that. So that's a conversation you can have with your doctor. Typically though, and eventually, once your water breaks, then we're talking about delivery, right? That's a sign that you are getting ready to have your baby, that you will have your baby within the next little bit of time. When your water breaks, that is a sign that you will be moving towards the hospital. So I said that your water could break at any point. If it breaks before contractions, then you have that conversation, you figure that out, you eventually make your way to the hospital. If you're in labor and you're having strong contractions, maybe you're doing the thing where like you're breathing and you're coping, you have your care team or your support team there at home. If you're at home and you've been laboring like that for a while and then your water breaks, sometimes that is a sign that you are getting closer, especially for a mom who's had a baby before. If you are planning to have a baby in the hospital and you are not in the hospital already and you've been laboring at home like that with very uncomfortable contractions and your water breaks, get in your car. Okay, those are the types of people that you hear about on the news, that you see on other YouTubes, of people who do deliver in their car, because like I said, once that water bag is no longer there, that extra pressure sometimes is just what your cervix needs in order for it to disappear and the baby to come down. Let's say you're in the hospital and you're having contractions, maybe you're coping with the contractions, and then your water breaks. I'll never forget, I was with a doula client and she had prayed that she would get to feel the sensation of her water bag breaking. And so we had talked about that ahead of time. Now, in the moment, all of a sudden her water broke. It was an audible pop. That's not necessarily normal. Sometimes you can hear like a little like, oh my God, I think I heard my water bag, especially if it's really quiet. Most of the time you're not gonna hear anything, but we heard this little pop and she goes, my water broke, my water broke. And she was already having pretty strong contractions. So at that moment, I was like, okay, here we go. Like, we are amping up to like really do this. And so I got in her face, not like in her face, but like I got in front of her and I said, look at me right now. We know this next contraction likely will be a lot stronger. Everything is okay. Everything is normal. This is good. You are one step closer to your baby. A lot of times we know that extra pressure can cause the contractions to all of a sudden amp up and become a lot more intense. Your baby can actually be born in the water bag. So it comes out, obviously without the placenta, but it comes out and it's sitting in the water bag, which is really cool. If you Google it, it's Encaul, so E-N-C-A-U-L. And the baby actually still thinks that they're inside. They don't realize that they've been born already. It's very rare, but you can see like the baby and what it looks like in the sac. You can see the membrane and see them like hanging out, and then all of a sudden it's like boom, and they're like, oh my God, like, what just happened to me? It's very rare that the baby is born in the sac, but it can actually happen. Sometimes in the hospital, they will actually request or ask to break your water. This could be for induction, but even sometimes maybe you're in the hospital and you're having contractions and your cervix just isn't changing too much. They may suggest that they can perform an amniotomy, which just means that the doctor breaks your water for you. They use this little hook. I don't have one, I need one. Basically imagine like a crochet hook that the end is really soft and then there's this little like sharper end. It's not really sharp, like you can touch it and it wouldn't ever puncture your skin. But basically they just do a vaginal exam, go inside and then like nick the bag. The baby doesn't feel anything. You don't feel anything other than the vaginal exam, and it's relatively safe. And eventually you also think that like your water bag has to break at some point. And so sometimes your doctor will request this in order to help to speed up the labor process. It's up to you whether or not you're okay with that, so that's something to consider. But just know that when you're in the hospital, that could be something that comes up related to your water breaking. The other thing I would consider if you're in the hospital is that if your doctor comes in and says, hey, what about if we break your water? And you know that you're okay with that, but let's say you don't have an epidural yet and you know you want an epidural. Always know those contractions likely will be significantly stronger with the water broken. You might want to consider getting an epidural right before the water breaks so that you know that you're not going to be like, whoa, oh my God, it just amped up out of nowhere and now you're like not coping with your contractions. So, in summary, when your water breaks, it could happen at any point in your labor or even before you have contractions. It can be either a trickle or a gush. When your water bag breaks, typically it's gonna make the contractions a lot stronger. So that's something to pay attention to. And then there is such a thing as an amniotomy or artificial rupture of membrane, AROM for medical lingo. And that just means that the doctor can break your water to help speed up labor. You wanna pay attention to taco, time, amount, color, and odor. Plan to move your way to the hospital. It's not an emergency, but get your booty over there and know that you are one step closer to having that baby and you are not going home without that baby in your arms outside of the sac. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I hope that answered all your questions and kind of gave you a great overview about what happens when your water breaks. The huge. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, don't forget to subscribe. You know the spiel. Everything's down below, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye. Hello, I'm Sarah Levon. As usual, I say the same thing every single time. I'm gonna take it one step deeper when talking about your water breaking. No. Today we're gonna talk about what it looks like when your water breaks and what to do about it. We're gonna do that today. We're gonna do it. We doing it. Oh God. The water It's been so good to be here with you today. The water, is that all I want to say? The water bag breaking. What else to say about the water? Amnion, chorion. Nah, none of that's important. That was an easy one. Might be short.